It's been a long and arduous journey, but I'm finally ready to make a decision about my game engine. Hello and welcome to the Infinite Inkwell, or welcome back to the Infinite Inkwell. I'm Lewis and I'm on a journey to discover new ways of telling stories. At the moment, I'm doing that through the medium of a video game. Now, up until I started this project, I had no technical expertise whatsoever. So I'm coming from a baseline of 0 technically, and I've never kind of explored this area before. So let's see how it goes. In my last video, I spent some time looking at Unreal Engine 5 and made the decision to abandon it completely because it turns out that my limited machine can't run Unreal pretty much at all. It took 20 minutes to load and I had loads of flickering with basic changes. It did not feel like something that I could use long term. Just a quick note, I did actually go and test Unreal Engine 4 and found that it had a very similar problem to the stuff that I had with Unreal 5. I know you guys said it should be much better on my machine, but I actually found that it was better, but it was not significantly better. I believe the load time went down from 20 minutes to 10, which is something, but it did take a long time just to get that loading screen. I think maybe 2 or 3 minutes before that 10-minute window. And then when I tried to load stuff, opened a project for the first time, and whilst it allowed me to use the tool, it did actually have at the bottom that it was loading the shaders in the background, which I do like. I think that was way better than my experience with Unreal Engine 5, which made you do it in the moment. So you actually couldn't do anything until all of the shaders are loaded, where this did it in the background, which was actually pretty neat. So kudos to Unreal Engine 4 for being practical. Sorry, Unreal Engine, you're probably not going to be used because it's still just a little problematic, especially as it crashed. It crashed while I was using it. I could not use my mouse or keyboard. It was not reacting to any input for about 5 minutes, and then it died. It just crashed in on itself. So yeah, that's everything for Unreal Engine and why I'm not going to be using it. Which brings me to today's video. So I've been on this journey of evaluating video game engines and trying to work out which one I should be using. And now I'm down to 2 from the original list of 3 that I had. I say original list, it's been a little bit arduous there. We've had some changes where I abandoned learning C++ for Godot, which then meant abandoning it for Unreal Engine, and replacing those 2 things with GameMaker and bringing that into the mix and starting to evaluate that alongside Godot with GDScript and Unreal Engine with Blueprint. So today we have our 2 finalists. We have Godot and we have GameMaker. So how am I going to be looking at this from an evaluation perspective? Let me walk you through the criteria that I'm going to be looking at to evaluate these 2 engines. So first of all, can it run my game? Does it support the features that I need and some of the mechanics that are included in my game design document? This is pretty huge, so obviously it's actually pretty crucial to whether I can use a game engine or not. Then we have performance. I have relatively limited hardware, as we covered in the Unreal video. So I need to make sure that whatever engine I'm going to pick, it's actually going to run and be relatively easy to use on the platform of choice that I have. So in this instance, I'm going to be using a Mac for the vast majority of my development, but we'll be testing across Steam Deck and my potato of a Windows PC. So I'm probably going to be okay with that. So I need to make sure that whatever I'm building will run on those things. Then we have the features of the actual engine itself. So what other things can it do that will be really useful for me to have access to? I know that different engines have different features, so we'll go through that in a bit more detail too. How easy is it to use? That's a big area that I'm going to be covering and looking at for my evaluation. Whatever I'm picking up needs to be relatively easy to use. If I have to spend a lot of time learning more than I'm doing, then there's a problem. The next area is going to be long-term viability. Now, this is actually going to be probably quite a questionable one for not just you guys watching it, but also for me to a degree, because there's only certain things that I'm going to know about those engines and the plans in the future. So this is probably going to be a little bit of a hedged bet, but also I'm going to be looking at what the engine can do and how viable it will be for me long term to use one engine as opposed to learn more and switch between them, depending on the needs that I have for a game. And last but not least, it's the accessibility of learning and the community around it. And I think that's going to have quite a heavy impact on whatever I choose to go for. So I'll be looking at both of those things and understanding, well, which of these should I be doing? And I want to be able to understand which of these engines should I be actually looking to with either a stronger community or really accessible learning or a blend of both. So that's my list. So let's get on with it. Before we go any further, I'm actually going to stick a counter on screen so we can see which of these criteria is actually the winner. I'm going to put this on the screen here so we can have a running checklist of which engine is winning, which engine is going to be the superior in each of the categories, and in some cases I imagine there'll be some ties. So look at how they're performing against each other to help inform my final decision. So our first category, can it support my game? Will I be able to build the features that I need that are documented in my game design document? Well, the good news is both of them get a tick. They can both support all of the features that are outlined in my current design document and even some more stuff. Regardless of whether I go with Godot or I go with GameMaker, I'll be able to do everything that I need. And that's actually pretty cool. Next up is performance. Performance with Godot was actually pretty good. I'll be honest, I can't complain about how Godot ran. Quite regularly I would be using it and building stuff in it. Quite often I would be screen recording while I was building stuff out. I would have YouTube on if I was trying to learn something. In some instances, I did actually have Adobe Premiere Pro and Photoshop open at the same time as Godot, and the only one that kind of ate itself a little bit was Photoshop, but that's Photoshop for you. Photoshop does not play well with others. But Godot ran very, very lightly. It didn't cause any crashes on its own. It didn't kind of die at all. I never had any issues with it. And in fact, when I wanted to make a change and then hit play to test out that change, it did it pretty quickly. We're talking maybe 3 or 4 seconds to then render it so I could play the level. That's pretty quick. And in fact, I'm very, very impressed with how light it is and how responsive it's been. So Godot's going to get a big tick from me. Okay, GameMaker. So as I said in my GameMaker video, I had some challenges with GameMaker. And as I saw from the comment section, it was actually pointed out to me that GameMaker has issues with Mac. It's always had a lot of issues when it's come to performance. And that doesn't fill me with confidence. It did crash a couple of times while I was using it. So I think I found myself losing faith with GameMaker because it crashed, because it was eating all of that RAM. So for anybody who doesn't know, I think it was using 14 gig of RAM, and my machine only has 8. I've been told now how it does that, but still, that's kind of insane when all I was doing is a single level. If you go back and look at that video, I'll stick a link up here, you'll see what I did, and it wasn't super crazy visual. It wasn't over the top at all. It was very light. So I'm kind of a little bit, I don't think I can give GameMaker the tick for this. I think by the sounds of it, it does perform better on Windows, which I'm not running. And even laptop mode was mentioned, but that was just for a scrolling issue. So I think it kind of fails the performance for me. It just is not reliable enough to not crash and die. If I'm not regularly updating my Git repo to make sure that any changes that I make are solid, and by the way, I will be doing that. I will be making sure that there is some kind of backup for all of my code, but it's probably not going to be that regular. It's maybe every day. I mean, I'm not going to have huge amounts of time to spend on this because I have to do a day job at the same time. So if I spend, say, 3 hours in an evening and it dies suddenly, or it crashes just before I'm rounding up, I'm going to be pretty upset. So I really need something a bit more reliable, and where I had a lot more of that stability with Godot, it's probably put me off of GameMaker entirely for that reason. So I'm afraid GameMaker is going to get a bit of a fail on this one. Features. I'm actually going to go with GameMaker on this one first, because GameMaker actually includes a load of cool stuff that I really liked. And I have to call out its sprite and tile map maker natively within the platform. Now, having that there is actually really, really helpful. So I don't have to leave and go somewhere else to build something. Even if I just did something basic like, oh wait, I completely forgot I need to have this thing. I can just go in and quickly draw it out and then add it. I don't have to go to a different tool. I don't need to go out and find another tool that I have to then use. That alone is actually super powerful. I can do everything within GameMaker. I think there was even the ability to record sound natively. So where I have actually already done the odd bit of sound recording with my voice using a microphone, that's been kind of cool, but being able to do it without the need of another piece of software is even better. So actually it does a pretty good job of including stuff like that and helping me as a user to be able to use it as a one-stop shop for everything that I might need. So I think that's going to get a tick. Godot's an interesting one when it comes to features. So whilst it does do an awful lot, it doesn't add quite as many things into the package. It doesn't have a native sprite editor. From what I've understood, it's actually also removed its visual code editor between version 3 and version 4. And in fact, that's another plus point for GameMaker. It includes that as part of its core functionality. So there's something to be said for that. And I don't think it's a fail, because a lot of the other tools that I could be using are either free or part of other things that I already have. So for instance, for a lot of the sound and pixel art, I can use the Adobe Creative Cloud because I have it for Premiere Pro, which I've been editing these videos in. So that's not too much of a problem. I have that already, but I have to use something else for it. I also have a couple of apps on my iPad where I'm hoping to do some of the art, which also supports things like Sprite. Yes, it's another piece of software I have to buy, but is typically seen as a regular, normal piece of software that most game developers will have when it comes to 2D art. So it's not the end of the world. It's not a negative mark on Godot, but more of a, it's fine. It's kind of like a pass, where GameMaker's getting a big thumbs up. Ease of use and accessibility. Well, actually, they're both pretty easy to use. With GameMaker, there were some things that were really easy to do and other things which weren't. On the list of things that weren't easy to do, we're talking about things like some of the collision zone stuff. That actually really annoyed me, as did some of the controller setup. The controller and mapping those controls to a character was actually far easier in Godot, which actually was a massive tick in that box, where in GameMaker it was annoyingly, frustratingly hard, and that caused me a lot of problems, so it wasn't actually that easy to set something up and test that it was working properly. I would also say that when it comes to that ease of use, it took a long time to fully rendered the game, even if it was just to test a level. Godot, on the other hand, loaded really quickly when I wanted to test a level. Mapping the controls were actually super simple. All I had to do was make some tweaks in the project settings. The project settings had everything I need to map controls, and I could do that on a joypad or I could do it on a keyboard and mouse. It didn't matter. This actually made it a lot easier to manipulate some really basic stuff. So from an ease of use and accessibility perspective, that scores pretty highly. It loses points where it didn't have a visual code editor that it had in previous versions, but I don't think that bothered me as much as, say, the collision stuff, which made it really easy in Godot, but was really hard in GameMaker. So I think this makes it really hard for me to judge both of these. I would say they both have plus points and negatives, so I think they both pass. I think it's a passing grade for both. There are pros and cons. Long-term viability is my next section. Well, this one is going to be very, very subjective. So long-term viability can mean a whole bunch of stuff. It could be how long do we think this engine has got left in it? How much more development are we going to see with it? And I don't think there's an easy way to answer this for either of them, if I'm honest. I think some of the challenges that I would have if I pick GameMaker is that it firmly puts me in the 2D game development space, and I'm not sure that's necessarily where I want to be all the time. It might be for the first game or two, but would it be nice to move into 3D development at some point? Sure, why not? It would be great to be able to do that, but GameMaker doesn't do that. Godot, on the other hand, absolutely does. It has both 2D and 3D support. I know the 3D element of Godot has some questions around it, particularly with the physics. But that will evolve. We're on version 4. GameMaker has been around for years and has had multiple iterations, so is a little bit more stable and established versus Godot, but Godot can go a long way yet. I think the other things to note is going to be licensing. Licensing is an interesting one. So the licensing for GameMaker is a one-off cost for a lifelong license, but I believe there are additional costs when it comes to releasing for console. Not an immediate issue for me right now, but maybe a consideration in the long term. I think in the short term, if I could release it on their own platform and probably Steam, that would be big enough for me. And the commercial license would let me do that. And I think that's about $100 US. Not bad at all, really. But then Godot is free and open source. So I can do anything with this engine. I don't have to worry about it. I know there's going to be ongoing support. There's a huge modding community to add things and extensions to Godot to give it more power, to let it do more cool stuff. So that's quite exciting. In fact, one of you mentioned in the comments section that there are extensions to add back the visual code editor. editor, which I might actually have a look at, because then it brings up Godot to have that more of a par when it comes to features with GameMaker. So the licensing is free, and if I want to push out a game with Godot on a different platform, I have to use a partner. I don't mind that too much. I mean, I know that for console releases, normally there are some tweaks you have to make, a lot of compatibility things, but then there's some weird licensing stuff for those platforms, which I also understand. So working with a publisher for those releases, I don't think it's a big issue right now, but something for a consideration on the long term. So when it comes to long-term viability, as I said, they're about the same. I have no major concerns with either of them. So let's say that there's probably a little bit more of a pass, if not a big thumbs up for Godot for enabling 3D as well as 2D game development, where we know that GameMaker is purely 2D. I know that for a 3D game, there would be a lot more investment in my time to build something in that kind of space, but it might also be cool to have the flexibility to look at, say, a 2.5D game, which would probably offer a lot more flexibility in that sense. So I might move from a 2D game to a 2.5D game for my second one, which would probably be more suitable in Godot over GameMaker. And then that would be a nice segue to a 3D game later in the future. I know that's a lot more work, so I'm kind of steering clear of that for now, which is why we're down the 2D route. So of the two, I think GameMaker's just going to get a passing grade. The last one is the availability of learning. Availability of learning is actually a really interesting one for me to talk about. So as you saw in my video, I absolutely loved the GameMaker documentation and the videos that they also created to go with it. I think they were very, very accessible and allowed anybody to pick up a lot of stuff relatively quickly. I think I had more challenges when I started to do something with the engine with the learning and realized there were a lot more gaps, but I think that was more to do with my expectations and my knowledge level as opposed to the learning. I still think the learning is very, very good. So there is that. When I went to look at some of the community elements and different creators out there, do seem to be a few less for GameMaker than Godot and a little bit less of a buzz, but that could be just from what's been happening recently. But there definitely seems to be less noise around GameMaker. But that, as I said, that could be purely about how timing has worked out here. Godot, on the other hand, doesn't have the best documentation, as I was quite critical of in my video a while ago, learning Godot. I found that their documentation was actually pretty shambolic. It was not accessible. So many times, go learn computer science first, then you can do this. GameMaker never did that, and that was brilliant. But the one thing that Godot has over GameMaker, or at least from what I found, is that there are so many creators out there sharing tutorials on Godot. There are a handful for good GameMaker, and there are a hell of a load for Unreal Engine. I found a lot of people creating on Unreal Engine and sharing stuff. A lot of how-tos out there, and a lot of how-tos for Godot, and less kind of new people to the field, more people who are quite established using the engine and had been doing game development for a long time, going, hey, this is how you do these things. This is where new features have been added and how they work. And even some really long courses out there. Clear Code is probably one of the ones which I'm definitely going to be looking at. It's like a 12-hour course, but it's all about how to do everything from the basics of importing a sprite and being able to move it around to lighting and particle effects. And that's kind of cool. In fact, there is another creator that I've recently followed, Choi TV, and in fact, I'll stick a link up here for him, and he's been live streaming his learning journey. And some of that stuff looks pretty cool. In fact, I tuned in a week or so ago and saw him doing the lighting stuff and how you can limit the way that lighting works within Godot. So that was pretty cool. And there are quite a few courses out there on Godot. And more recently, we've had Brackies come in and do a big tutorial on Godot after having been quiet for quite a long period of time. I haven't checked it out yet. It is on my list, but I wanted to wait to see how this went first. And I'll be honest, I probably will go back and look at that now, because if it's not obvious, this list has an awful lot of ticks in the Godot column. This is a pickup at a later date, which is why I look a little different, because I didn't realize when I was recording that I missed out giving these guys a pass or a fail on learning and community. So what I can say is that both of them not only pass, they both get thumbs up. Now, the one thing that I will say is that I think Godot is actually going to get a double thumbs up just because the sheer volume of content that is out there from community and creators is just exceptional. And I don't think that GameMaker can match it with its documentation and the few bits of community stuff that's out there alone. So I'm actually going to put 2 ticks on Godot and just the 1 on GameMaker. It would seem unfair to just have a pass for either of them at this point. And that is why I'm going to be using Godot moving forward. The learning isn't great, but the community makes up for it. The content that's been created by third parties out there, so both institutions and small creators, are fantastic. And I will be looking at those to help me understand how I build my game. I would say the stability of the platform is a huge thing for me and was a big black mark for GameMaker. I know there's a lot of people out there who love GameMaker, but my machine just it won't support it properly. As I said, it was a big black mark against GameMaker, as was its inability to do anything outside of 2D games. I know that right now I'm looking at 2D, but being able to learn one thing and scale it across different titles and different technologies, so moving from 2D to 3D, it's actually pretty cool. So it's a little bit of a downer for me. I think the other reason that Godot makes sense for me is that I work with developers. I'm not a technical person, but I do work with developers, and a lot of them use Python. And there's certain elements where I go, I wish I could read what they're showing me. I don't understand any of it. I'm just the business guy, effectively. You know, I understand the needs of the business. I don't understand what these guys are writing. I understand what it does because I've asked them to tell me what it does, but I don't understand how to read it and how it works. So by using something like GD script as a little bit of a just understanding how code typically works and is structured would be a nice step if I needed it or wanted to look at Python later, which is what most of my devs are currently using. So it has some practical real world elements that I can learn from. So on the whole, Godot is probably the complete package for me. It runs nicely. It looks pretty good. Yes, I'm going to have to learn code as opposed to the drag and drop stuff, but I'm not overly fazed by that. In fact, now I've picked my engine, I'm actually more hyped. I'm more excited about this journey. I want to go and do something else now. I've got my engine, it's settled. I'm going to be using Godot, but now what? The now what thing is huge for me, and I really think that it has to come down just to a few things. I can now review my game design document and see if anything needs to change based on what I learned while I was looking at engines. I'll be honest, there's already some bits that I've started to update around the technology. So going into making this video, I kind of knew that it was probably going to be Godot. And I started putting down some notes around, okay, well, this is probably the engine that I'm going to be using. These are some of the other tools that I think I'm going to need to be using alongside that. So whether that's Sprite or Adobe Audition for sound, I just went in and was like, okay, I've got now a shorter list around what software I might be using. But I now also want to look at if there are any mechanics that I've now reconsidered or wanted to include after doing this and going through the process of making a couple of levels across a couple of engines. I think there are some small things in there, but nothing major that's going to completely disrupt the game. So in my next video, I'm not going to walk you through my game design document again. Instead, I'm going to talk about how I'm going to be planning it and what that kind of looks like. I've started to pull together some basic pieces around how I'm thinking about chopping up the game and how I can actually plan it in a way where I can always see what I need to do next and I'm not missing stuff. So that will be my next video, going through how I'm going to be using Notion to help me manage building my game. I'm also going to talk you through how I'm chunking it up as well, because I think this makes sense for what will effectively be the MVP basic functionality of the game. So yeah, that's everything for this week. If you like this video, do hit the like button. I'd really appreciate it. It'd be very, very nice of you. If you really, really like this video and you want to come along the journey and see what I'm going to be building with Godot. What can I do with this? What stories can I tell? Then hit the subscribe button. It would be great to have you along for the journey. If you have any comments or thoughts, do stick them down in the comment section. I do try and be active down there, but I'm doing this while having a full-time job and other bits of my life going on, so I won't always get to them, but I will try. I have been enjoying conversations with you guys. I really like it, and some of the stuff you've been giving me has been really, really useful, so thank you so much for that. Anyway, that's everything. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.